What happens when one of Hollywood's most private actors finally breaks his silence, only to be met with the most confrontational interview of his career? The answer is about to shock you, but before we get into what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on. After you hear this whole story, trust me, you're going to have opinions. Macaulay Culkin walked onto The View, set to what should have been a routine promotional appearance. He was there to discuss his podcast, his recent creative projects, and maybe share a few lighthearted stories from his unconventional journey through fame. The audience applauded warmly as he took his seat, offering polite waves and a reserved smile. What nobody expected, least of all Culkin himself, was that this would become one of the most intense confrontations in the show's history. The conversation started pleasantly enough. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed him, and there was brief small talk about his podcast and his approach to selective public appearances. Culkin was characteristically measured in his responses, offering thoughtful insights without revealing too much. He spoke about the creative freedom that came with stepping away from traditional Hollywood, about finding fulfillment in projects that genuinely interested him rather than chasing mainstream approval. Then Joy Behar leaned forward. "You know, Macaulay, a lot of people have been wondering something for years now," she began, her tone shifting slightly. "You had everything. You were the biggest child star in the world. You could have had any career you wanted, and then you just, sort of, disappeared. Don't you think you owe your fans an explanation for walking away from all of that?" The studio went quiet. Culkin's expression didn't change immediately, but there was a subtle tension in his jaw. He took a breath before responding. "I don't think I owe anyone an explanation for living my life the way I chose to live it," he said evenly. "I was a kid who worked constantly. When I got older, I made a decision about what I wanted my life to look like. That's not disappearing, that's called making a choice." Joy pressed on. "But don't you think it was selfish? There were people who invested in you, who believed in you, who wanted to see what you could become, and you just walked away from all of it." "Selfish," Culkin repeated, and now his voice carried an edge. "I was 8 years old when I became famous. I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask to have my childhood broadcast to millions of people. I worked harder before I was 12 than most people work in their entire lives. So if taking a step back to figure out who I actually was, separate from all of that, was selfish, then I guess I'm okay with that label." Sunny Hostin attempted to redirect. "I think what Joy might be asking is whether you have any regrets about the timing or the way you stepped back from acting." But Joy wasn't done. "No, that's not what I'm asking," she interjected. "I'm asking if he realizes how many people would have killed for the opportunities he had and he just threw them away. There are thousands of talented people who never get a shot. And you had every shot and you just, decided it wasn't for you." Culkin leaned back in his chair, and his demeanor shifted noticeably. The polite, reserved guest was gone. "You're framing this like I had some kind of obligation to perform for people's entertainment for the rest of my life. Like because I was successful as a child, I somehow signed away my right to make my own decisions as an adult. That's not how life works, Joy. That's not how any of this works. I'm just saying," Joy continued, "you had a platform. You had influence. You could have done something meaningful with that, and instead, you retreated." "Done something meaningful." Culkin's voice rose slightly. "According to whose definition? Yours. I've lived my life according to my own values, not according to what people I've never met think I should be doing with my time. I've created things I'm proud of. I've built relationships that matter to me. I've taken care of my mental health. But apparently, because I'm not on a movie screen every year, I've wasted my potential." The audience was completely silent now, the tension palpable. Sarah Ann tried to interject with a lighter comment, but the momentum of the conversation had already shifted beyond repair. "Look," Joy said, her tone defensive now, "I think you're taking this the wrong way. I'm just trying to understand your choices." "No," Culkin said firmly, "you're not trying to understand anything. You're judging. There's a difference. You've already decided that my choices were wrong, and now you're just waiting for me to either defend myself or apologize. And I'm not going to do either." Whoopi attempted to mediate. "I think we can all appreciate that everyone's path is different, and Macaulay certainly doesn't owe anyone an explanation for how he's chosen to live his life." But Culkin was just getting started. "You know what the real issue is here? The real issue is that people are uncomfortable when someone steps outside the system. When someone says, 'Actually, I don't want what you're selling. I'm going to do things my own way.' That makes people uncomfortable because it forces them to question their own choices. If I can walk away from fame and money and be happy, what does that say about everyone else who's chasing those things?" Joy shook her head. "That's not what this is about, isn't it though?" Culkin challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're bothered by the fact that I didn't play by the rules. I didn't follow the script of what a child star is supposed to do. I didn't burn out spectacularly. I didn't make a comeback. I didn't write a tell-all book blaming everyone else for my problems. I just quietly lived my life, and somehow that's offensive to you." Alyssa Farah Griffin jumped in. I don't think anyone here is offended by your choices, Macaulay. I think there's just curiosity about someone who achieved such massive success at a young age and then chose a different path. Curiosity is fine, Culkin responded. Curiosity would be asking me what I've been working on. Curiosity would be asking me what I learned from my experiences. What Joy did wasn't curiosity. It was an accusation dressed up as a question. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough, but the cameras were still rolling. And what happened next would cement this interview as legendary. Joy leaned forward again. You talk about making your own choices, but let's be honest. Your life hasn't exactly been a fairy tale since you left Hollywood, has it? There have been struggles, there have been difficult times. Maybe if you had stayed the course, things would have been different. And that's when Culkin truly erupted. Culkin's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled but seething with barely contained anger. You want to talk about my struggles? You want to sit here on national television and use my difficult moments as some kind of gotcha to prove your point? That's low, Joy. That's really low. Joy seemed taken aback by the intensity of his response. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm just pointing out that maybe the path you chose wasn't as perfect as you're making it sound. I never said it was perfect, Culkin fired back. I never claimed to have all the answers or to have lived some flawless life. But here's what I did do. I survived. I took control of my own narrative when I could have easily let the industry, let people like you, define who I was supposed to be. Yes, I've struggled. Yes, I've had dark times. But those struggles were mine. They weren't performed for cameras. They weren't monetized. They were real human experiences that I got to process privately, the way every person deserves to process their pain. Whoopi tried again to bring the temperature down. I think we're all just trying to have a conversation here about the unique pressures of child stardom and how different people handle it differently. But Culkin wasn't letting it go. No, Whoopi, with all due respect, that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that Joy decided before I even walked out here that she was going to take me to task for not living my life according to her expectations. And I'm done pretending that's okay. I'm done nodding along while people treat my personal decisions like they're up for public debate. Sarah N. attempted to shift gears. Can we talk about the work you are doing now? Your podcast has been really successful, and you've been involved in some interesting creative projects. Culkin glanced at her, seeming to appreciate the attempt to redirect, but Joy wasn't finished. Before we move on, Joy interjected. I just want to say that I think you're being overly sensitive about this. I'm asking questions that I think a lot of people want answers to. That's what we do here. We have conversations. Overly sensitive, Culkin repeated, and there was a dangerous calm in his voice now. That's interesting, because when men in power get challenged on their decisions, they're defending themselves. But when someone who was exploited as a child pushes back against being judged for trying to take control of their own life, they're being overly sensitive. Do you see the double standard there, or do I need to spell it out for you? The audience began to murmur. Some people were clearly uncomfortable. Others seemed to be on Culkin's side. Joy's face flushed slightly. That's not fair, Joy said. I'm not exploiting you. I'm interviewing you. You're not interviewing me. Culkin corrected her. An interview implies good faith. An interview implies you're actually interested in what I have to say. What you're doing is prosecuting me for choices you've already decided are wrong. There's a massive difference. Sonny Hostin, who had been largely quiet, spoke up. Macaulay, from a legal perspective, you certainly have every right to make whatever choices you want with your career and your life. But I think what might be at the heart of Joy's questions is a broader conversation about celebrity responsibility and platform. When someone has the kind of influence you had, do you think there's any responsibility to use that in a certain way? Culkin turned to her, and his response was more measured. That's a more thoughtful question, Sonny, and I appreciate that. Here's my answer. I think the responsibility I had, the only responsibility I had, was to myself and to the people I care about. I was put into a position I never asked for as a child. I didn't seek out fame. I didn't campaign for influence. It was thrust upon me, and it came with a cost that I don't think most people can truly understand unless they've lived it. So when I finally had the agency to make my own choices, my responsibility was to choose sanity over spectacle. If that disappoints people, I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was continuing to perform a version of myself that wasn't real, just to meet other people's expectations. Alyssa Farah Griffin nodded. I think that's actually a really powerful message, especially for young people who feel pressured to follow a certain path just because it's what's expected of them. Joy, however, seemed determined to have the last word. I hear what you're saying, but I still think you're missing the point. You had a gift. You had talent that very few people have. And gifts like that, I believe, come with responsibility. You don't just get to take your ball and go home because things got hard. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Culkin's expression hardened. Things got hard, he said quietly. Is that what you think happened? That things just got a little hard and I couldn't handle it? Let me tell you something, Joy. I spent my childhood working 16-hour days. I spent my adolescence in court fighting for control of the money I had earned. I spent my teenage years being followed by photographers everywhere I went. I had strangers convinced they knew everything about me based on movies I made when I was 10 years old. I had people making assumptions about my family, my relationships, my mental health. All while I was just trying to figure out who I was as a person. So don't you dare reduce my decision to step back as me not being able to handle things getting hard. The studio was absolutely silent now. Even Joy seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Culkin continued, his voice gaining strength. You want to know what takes real strength? Walking away. Saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. Building a life that's actually yours instead of living the life other people scripted for you. That takes more courage than just staying on the hamster wheel because it's safe and familiar. Whoopi nodded slowly. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. Actually, the courage it takes to go against the grain. But Joy, clearly feeling defensive now, pushed back one more time. I just think it's a waste. That's all. You could have been one of the great actors of your generation. According to whose definition of great? Culkin shot back immediately. Awards, box office numbers, magazine covers. I'm not interested in being great by Hollywood's standards. I'm interested in being whole as a human being. And if you can't understand the difference, then I genuinely feel sorry for you. The comment landed like a bomb. Joy's face went red, and she opened her mouth to respond. But Culkin kept going. This is exactly what's wrong with how we talk about celebrity in this culture. We act like fame is the ultimate goal, like once you achieve it, you should just be grateful and never question whether it's actually making you happy. We worship at the altar of recognition and validation from strangers. And then we act surprised when people who have that recognition tell us it's empty. I'm not saying fame is evil. I'm not saying everyone who pursues it is wrong. I'm saying that for me, it wasn't the answer, and I shouldn't have to justify that to you or anyone else. Sarah N. tried once more to lighten the mood. Well, this has certainly been one of the most honest conversations we've had on this show. Culkin turned to her with a slight smile. Honest is all I know how to be at this point. I spent too many years being what other people wanted me to be. Joy, regaining some composure, decided to try a different approach. Look, clearly, we have very different perspectives on this. But can you at least acknowledge that some people might see your choices as privileged? Not everyone has the luxury of walking away from a successful career. Culkin's laugh was sharp and humorless. Privileged? You think what I went through was privilege? Being a child actor isn't some glamorous fantasy. Joy, it's work. It's brutal, exhausting work. And yes, it came with money and recognition. But it also came with a complete loss of normalcy. A childhood that existed only in the margins of shooting schedules. And a level of scrutiny that would break most adults, let alone kids. So when I finally had the means to step back, yeah, I used that option. But let's not pretend that option came free. It came at a cost that I paid for years. Sunny interjected thoughtfully. I think what's interesting about this conversation is that it highlights how we as a society place different values on different types of success. Macaulay, you clearly value personal peace and authenticity over public achievement, and there's nothing wrong with that. Thank you, Culkin said, nodding at her. That's exactly it. I'm not saying my way is the right way for everyone. I'm saying it's the right way for me, and I shouldn't be interrogated for that choice decades later. Joy leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I'm not interrogating you. I'm having a discussion. No, Culkin said firmly, you've been attacking my character since I sat down. There's a difference between asking someone about their journey and implying that their journey was wrong. You've done the latter repeatedly. Alyssa jumped in, trying to find middle ground. Do you think there's any way that both things can be true? That your decision was right for you, but that people who admired your work might still feel a sense of loss about not seeing more of it? Culkin considered this for a moment. Sure, I can accept that. I understand that people connected with the work I did as a kid. I understand that there might be disappointment that I didn't continue in that vein. What I can't accept is the idea that their disappointment somehow obligates me to live my life differently. Your feelings about my career don't get to dictate my choices. That's the boundary I'm drawing here. Whoopi nodded approvingly. That's a healthy boundary to have. But Joy wasn't done. I just think that when you accept the benefits of fame, the money, the opportunities, the platform, you also accept certain responsibilities that come with it. Culkin's patience was clearly wearing thin. I was 8 years old. Joy, 8. I didn't accept anything. I didn't sign a social contract. I was a kid who liked acting and then suddenly became famous. And once I was old enough to understand what that meant and what it was costing me, I made a different choice. If you want to talk about responsibility, let's talk about the responsibility adults have to protect children in the industry. Let's talk about the responsibility media has to not exploit people's pain for entertainment. Let's talk about the responsibility we all have to let people live their lives without constant judgment. Those are the responsibilities I care about. The audience began to applaud, softly at first, then more loudly. Joy looked around, clearly surprised by the response. Sarah seized the moment. I think what we're seeing here is someone who's done the hard work of figuring out what matters to them, and that's actually really admirable. Culkin nodded at her gratefully. I appreciate that. And look, I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm not trying to make this confrontational. But I've spent too many years being polite while people made assumptions about my life, my choices, my character. I'm at a point now where I'd rather be honest and uncomfortable than polite and fake. Joy sighed. Well, you've certainly been honest. Have I made you uncomfortable? Culkin asked directly. Joy paused. You've been more confrontational than I expected. Good, Culkin said. Maybe that discomfort is useful. Maybe it'll make you think twice before you make assumptions about someone's life and then present those assumptions as questions. Because that's what you did here today. Joy, you didn't ask me about my journey. You told me your opinion of my journey and then got defensive when I didn't agree with it. Whoopi looked at Joy, then at Culkin. I think we can all learn something from this conversation, honestly, about assumptions, about judgment, about what we expect from people in the public eye, Sunny added, and about the difference between curiosity and criticism. Those are two very different things, and it's worth being mindful of which one we're actually engaging in. Joy shifted in her seat. I didn't mean to come across as critical. Culkin looked at her steadily. But you did, and maybe that's worth examining. Why did you feel the need to criticize my choices? What about my decision to prioritize my well-being over my career bothered you so much? The question hung in the air. Joy looked genuinely taken aback, as if she hadn't considered her own motivations. I don't know, she admitted finally. Maybe because I can't imagine walking away from something I worked so hard for. And that's fine, Culkin said, his tone softening slightly. That's your value system, but it's not mine. And it doesn't have to be. We can have different priorities and both be okay. Alyssa smiled. That feels like a good place to land. Actually, agreeing that different paths work for different people. Culkin nodded. I can agree with that. I'm not here to convince anyone that my way is the only way. I'm just here to defend my right to have chosen it without being made to feel like I owe everyone an explanation or an apology. Whoopi looked directly at the camera. I think that's a message a lot of people need to hear. You don't owe anyone an explanation for living your life in a way that's authentic to you. Joy, seeming to sense that she'd lost this battle, tried one last time. I hope you can understand that my questions came from a place of genuine curiosity, even if they didn't land that way. Culkin studied her for a moment. I think your questions came from a place of judgment that you've dressed up as curiosity, but I appreciate the attempt at a peace offering. The audience laughed, breaking some of the tension. Even Joy managed a small smile, though it was clear she was uncomfortable. Sarah turned to Culkin. Before we wrap up, is there anything you want people to know about what you're working on now, about the life you've built for yourself? Culkin's expression relaxed. I'm happy. That's really what it comes down to. I'm doing work that fulfills me. I have relationships that matter. I'm living a life that feels authentic. And honestly, that's more than a lot of people can say, famous or not. Sunny nodded. That's the real success story, isn't it? Finding contentment on your own terms. Exactly, Culkin agreed. Success isn't one size fits all. It's not about checking boxes or meeting other people's expectations. It's about looking at your life and feeling good about how you're spending your time and who you're spending it with. Whoopi smiled warmly. That's beautiful, actually, and I think you've given us all something to think about today. Joy, clearly eager to end on a better note, added, well, you've certainly made this a memorable interview. Culkin smiled wryly. I'm sure I have, but at least it was real. And honestly, I'd rather have a difficult real conversation than an easy fake one any day. The show went to commercial, and while the cameras were still rolling for a few extra seconds, you could see Culkin take a deep breath, as if releasing all the tension he'd been holding. The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly processing what had just happened. This wasn't just an interview. It was a masterclass in setting boundaries, defending your choices, and refusing to let others define your narrative. Culkin didn't just answer Joy's questions. He fundamentally challenged the premise behind them. He forced everyone watching to consider what we expect from celebrities, what we think they owe us, and whether those expectations are fair or even reasonable. So what do you think? Was Macaulay Culkin right to push back as hard as he did, or should he have kept things more diplomatic? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Comment and let me know. Do you think celebrities have a responsibility to their fans, or is their first responsibility to themselves?